Welcome to Island Connections. On today's episode,
Ulu Man.
also known as Professor Ty Tegan. We'll be cruising with Ty this episode, so stay tuned.
Okay.
We gotta keep that one. I think we're gonna keep
I
it.
gotta get this thing off my
You
head.
gotta get it off. All right, costume change, everybody.
Drop in, take a spin. Survival, give you a win. To a sunrise, wave goodbye, off into oblivion. You slide, dark black as night.
So Ty, you've been with us in ethnic studies for quite a while, along with anthropology. Can you just give us a little rundown of how did you get here?
Yeah, well, thanks, Ethan, Ruben, and all of our doggies for being a part of this venture. I went to high school at Kamehameha, originally from Maui, Waiahu, then was at Kamehameha, went to Dartmouth for my undergraduate in anthropology and Native American studies, got a couple of fellowships that let me go to graduate school. I wanted to come back home just to be working in my community, doing research within the Hawaiian community. So came here to get my PhD in anthropology, which finished in 2003, and was fortunate enough to have been hired in this joint position in ethnic studies and anthropology that same year in 2003. So been here since then, always wanted to be here, and was real fortunate to have gotten that chance to have gotten hired here.
Nice. And how has what you originally started, I guess, researching changed since your time as a grad student to now?
Yeah, sure. So my original research for my dissertation was on a Hawaiian men's group that I'm a part of called the Hale Mua. And it takes the name of the traditional Hawaiian men's house. And it was a broader kind of thinking on Hawaiian masculinities, the intersections of indigeneity and masculinity and nationhood. As the men's group I'm a part of, that was primarily focused in my writing on the Maui group. There's a couple groups, but the Maui group I was first a part of really came at this moment where there was a lot of discussion about, where are the men in the Hawaiian community and the movement. And so that's where those questions arose. And when I was doing this ethnography of our Hale Mua, a lot of that focus was on both ways in which Hawaiian traditions of warriorhood and ceremony were being brought in as a part of the way that our Kanaka men have rearticulated, remade their identities in service of our Lahui, of our nation, of our Aina. And that eventually led to additional thinking on this notion of warriorhood and service, in particular in the military, as a lot of the men in the Hale Mua were also veterans. And so thinking about that also led me to some of my own genealogies, as far as being partly born in the military. This is my dad's fatigues that I'm wearing. He's in the Army and was in the Army. He retired Army, but I was born in Germany when he was stationed there. Always had a lot of ambivalence and other feelings about the military and kind of the ways it created a lot of challenges, both in terms of my own family, but more broadly for our Hawaiian people. So thinking of the place of Hawaiians in the military led to thinking on some of the themes that came out of my original work on what it is for Hawaiian men in particular to fulfill their kuleana, their duty, and to be of service. What do these all mean when you're on the one hand, doing it as a Hawaiian, and one of the few ways in which perhaps Hawaiian men could find a sense of achievement, but also in service of the empire that is the reason that our sovereignty has been suppressed and our land occupied. And so that became another major project. Also coming from some of that, as well as the original work with the Halimua, were ways in which ceremonies were really kind of central for reimagining Hawaiian spaces and places. Some of that was in the museum space, and there was an important kind of ceremony and exhibition that I was a part of in 2010 that had the reunification of the three last carved Ku images, temple images of the god Ku, this deity who is in some ways seen as this kind of embodiment of Hawaiian masculinity and masculinities in the plural, because Ku has many facets, oftentimes only thought of as the god of war, but a god of governance, of forest, of healing. And the bringing together of these last images in 2010 was in the bicentennial of the founding of the Hawaiian Kingdom. So there is quite a lot going on. There is also a larger men's movement happening with the formation of the Ahakane Hawaiian Men's Foundation and conferences around that. And so I was involved in that event in a number of different ways. And I'm bringing this all up to finally explain my costume because these images of Ku were carved from ulu, from breadfruit. And one of the stories, in fact, which I wrote about, that is a traditional story of how the breadfruit tree the ulu tree came to Hawaii, was back way long ago, the god Ku was living as a man on earth, and his wife Hina was with him, and they had their family, but there was a famine in the land, and everyone was starving, and so he told his wife that he's gonna go away on a long trip, but when it's necessary in order to save the family and the people. So what he did was he stood on his head and went down into the earth at that spot. Hina wept for him, and her tears watered that spot, and eventually the first breadfruit tree came from there. And it was what saved the people, the family, the community. And so that sacrifice and that act, and that was something that I thought was a really powerful story for thinking about Hawaiian masculinities in all kinds of different ways. And so the fact that the Ku images were carved from that same wood also suggests that this is something that our kupuna, our ancestors, had also made connections with in terms of Ku, rather than not just this warrior who's about the fighting and killing, which there are versions of Ku that are about that, and have been invoked that way, but all other ways in which Ku is this provider as well as protector. So that's the ulu that came from Ku and fed the people.
I'm loving this, like, not just coming in a costume, not just throwing a chicken head on. Dang, not living up to.
It all connects.
Yeah.
All the pieces matter.
How has that book been received? I mean, it's now 16 years, over 16 years, right?
My first book, The Native Men Remade, yeah, I think it's been received well. In general, it's always hard for me to kind of assess how the work has been taken up, but it was then and remains now still one of the very few kind of ethnographic texts on indigenous masculinities and men. There's other articles that have been kind of written in some collected volumes, but not a lot in terms of a full-length book. It's just focused on kind of issues of indigenous masculinity, either here or elsewhere. And so for that reason, it's been used a lot in different courses, and also has been one of the things that helped to spark broader conversations around Indigenous men and masculinities, not only in Hawaii, but globally. It's been a part of those discussions. Locally here, it's less the book, I feel. Definitely a lot of the people involved with the organizations that I talked about have seen it, read it. I gave a bunch away and otherwise have presented quite a lot on it. But I feel it's less the book itself that has had the impact, but more how it's been a part of this broader conversation on thinking about masculinities broadly, but also specifically with Hawaiian men and the place of Hawaiian men in our lahui, in our nation, and in the movement to reclaim ea, sovereignty, life, breath, that concept that is at the center of our current movements. It's also part of a broader set of debates on gender in our community, gender and sexuality, and critiques, important critiques of the intersections of heteropatriarchy with settler colonialism, and what are the places of our own people in trying to decolonize our own thinking with regards to gender and sexuality. So it's been in that ways also important to be in those dialogues.
That's really interesting, and I think those sort of conversations about bridging together gender, sexuality, and indigeneity become so crucial to think about when we're looking at that military connection. So it also then has me wondering too, how do you build on this work from the first book and the subsequent work into your next project? Like what else is kind of coming up the pipeline that also connects back to this original line of work and intervention?
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge there, and for me, trying to link the two in some ways, it's taking inspiration from our Aina as that core that helps to really root, metaphorically, literally, our practices, our thinking in ways that are more regenerative, that are going to support our community rather than divide, and to really look into those examples from the Aina as ways of thinking through those some of the current divisions and dichotomies that were created by colonialism in terms of gender and sexuality. So the Ulu story was one that I found inspiration for, and in trying to frame the ways, and in this particular exhibit that I talked about, it was also I was on a community consultant group that involved also two really well-respected Native Hawaiian veterans who were also a part of the project I've been doing for my book. And their experiences of Ku was very much through war. They're two Vietnam veterans. But engaging in the dialogue in terms of our history, our ancestry, thinking about other forms of Ku, including this rooted in the Ulu, helps to broaden those discussions and to create new ways of being in dialogue around, I think, really some difficult subjects around our own men in the military.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I want to kind of expand on this transition period as an academic, and the questions and connections you're making through and to masculinities, right? How separate or equal, or how connected, I guess, do you really want this ongoing discussion, right? I mean, your work and your research is kind of 16 years at a moment in time, but you've continued researching. Masculinities have changed, times have changed. I guess, how do you get to use your own research and expand on it as you go to these new spaces that are, very distinct?
Yeah. Thanks for that. I think even from the beginning, my own focus on masculinities and thinking with our Halemua, our men's group, was only meant to be a first step, an important step, but a first step into a broader set of discussions around our contemporary struggles as a people, to redefine ourselves as a people, as families. What are the roles within these families and communities? Gender and these questions of men and masculinity were really prominent at the time when I started. They seem to be less prominent explicitly, although a lot of the same issues that prompted the more public dialogues are still very much present. So, I mean, those always remain with me when I'm doing the new work. But in part because of these other projects, I'm looking towards the ways in which land-based relations offer us other kinds of forms of being that are not stuck with some of the dichotomous thinking that was created in terms of gender and sexuality. Has been a little bit more, I think, generative for me. So not only the ulu, one of the core terms I'm trying to work through with the book is koa. And so the term koa is both the warrior and could be a term for a veteran. It's also the word in Hawaiian for bravery and courage. The Halemua that I was a part of originally was called Nākoa, the courageous ones, or the warriors. And it also is the tree, the important Hawaiian hardwood tree, whose wood was used, and logs were used for canoes, and wood has been used for all manner of items. But in the forest, the koa is also the one of the key species that creates the canopy that protects other native species. It's also, the leaves are actually the phyllodes that have a kind of crescent shape that are meant to catch the water in the clouds and uplands and divert the water down into the ground to its roots and to those other plants under it. It has an important role in, I believe, locking in, I think, is nitrogen in the soil and generally providing. It grows in a really inspiring way that I think has resonance with the ways in which the veterans' own growth as Hawaiians has been narrated to me. A lot of my interviews with them a lot of my research with them has been through interviews. But the koa tree, the seeds can go into the soil and stay dormant for years, even decades. It takes something that disturbs the soil and actually scars the seed in order for the water to get in, to germinate it, to let it grow again, or to make it grow, that is. And so that process of growth through scarification in moments where the land has been disturbed that produces koa is something that in many ways I think speaks to the experience of not only Hawaiian men, but also our wahine and our trans and mahu ohana that have had to grow in this kind of fashion. And so thinking through the ways in which koa as the tree, as a plant, but also as a way of being courageous as a warrior, has been a part of the stories, and what it says specifically around masculinities and Hawaiian men's experiences in the military become just one step in terms of thinking more broadly about how we as a lahui have taken on koa in different ways in our struggle for our land, for our waters, and for our oceans. And in that regard, in part because of the fires in Maui, another area I'm really trying to focus in on has been the struggles around water on Maui, which is something that also has connections in my earlier projects. Some of the key leaders on Maui involved in these struggles have emerged out of this work with the Halemua and other groups that took on that name of Nākoa. It's also, again, my own home. And so returning there is connected to some of the veteran stuff, but it's a little bit of a different direction, but really inspired because of the moments of the fires, and previous work that I had also done in my capacity, serving as an expert witness in a number of water cases on Maui, which I had never written about in terms of as far as my own kind of academic publishing and scholarship, but it was an important way in which I was able to support a lot of the taro farmers and others who were struggling to reclaim water that had been historically diverted by plantations and now controlled by developers, which is the reason that Lahaina burned, is because the waters that naturally should be running their course are all privately controlled. Pretty much like 75% of the waters in West Maui are controlled privately by developers who were the successors of the plantations that had previously kind of taken control of them. So that's all also part of this kind of growth and movement in terms of what I've been thinking through.
There's so many rich like analytics and different ways of thinking, right? And there's a couple, I guess, lines of questions that I'm just wondering if you want to expand on, is just the different understanding of protection, and how I think in at least in certain settler colonial understandings of the military, right, protection and defense are tied up with all sorts of kind of gendered forms of violence, right? And it seems like you're speaking around those issues, and so I guess what I'm really asking here is, does some of this work feel like you're seeking new ways of thinking, or just rediscovering kind of old ways of thinking, I guess, or
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I feel like it's always in that how those old ways are remade in the present. They're rearticulated. They're never new. They're there, but they're also coming out in unique forms in this current moment, even though they're rooted in these older ways of being that we've been kind of seeking for a while as a Lahui. And then, that's I think a lot of where this journey has taken me. And first thinking about what does it mean to be a koa as a warrior, and really getting over just the kind of stereotype of the fighter who's violent and who can go and just kick ass, which is in a lot of ways what drew me in my very early young years out of college to the group that was called Nakoa that became the Halimua. Say, oh yeah, these guys are badasses. That's what I want to be. And quickly came to find the flaws in that thinking, that being koa isn't just about being the baddest, strongest fighter out there, but it's really how you're able to stand up for your own culture and community. And that's one level of it. It's also the fact too, though, that there still is a certain appeal of that kind of fighting warrior and that version of masculinity and hypermasculinity, which in a lot of ways is still very detrimental to our community and our own men who still see that as the motto. And despite efforts to move away from it, even within our own group, there's still a lot of holding on to those kinds of hegemonic notions, those dominant notions of what it is to kind of be a man, and including its connections with sexuality and the kind of some of the more latent and not so latent forms of homophobia that comes with. So yeah, I mean, to your point, there's an effort to find old ways of being, but I think they're always challenged in terms of how we're interpreting what those traditions are, and oftentimes still not critical enough about what we're calling traditional forms of masculinity and warriorhood, and why I think this really looking at other notions of koa and like you said, protection and defense Kia'i has been one of these key words that has come up because of the stance taken on the Mauna. This called a Kia'i to be in protection of the land, also with water, and moving back to what I was thinking in terms of water protection and water protectors, again, connecting our movement with also broader global movements to protect water and land. And so that practice of being Kia'i is, I think, an important one that helps us to reframe, what defense and protection is. Kia'i is also one of the roles that our own Halimua would serve in terms of ceremonies, and so there's a certain way in which a kind of training as Kia'i, as guards for ceremonial spaces, I think that is in attunement with ritual, with culture, with land, with the Aina, helps to give us a different kind of sense of protection than maybe the kind of training that some of them actually had in the military. And that was also part of those tensions and rethinkings that I've been working through. And again, when we're focused on protection of land, Kia'i and water, I think it calls forward all kinds of things. Some of them negative too. Some of them in terms of older ways of thinking about defense, but it also brings up a lot of the traumas that have come with the pains that our people and our lands have suffered. So working through that has been a really important, and we saw that on the Mauna too, and we see that now in Lahaina, working through what it means to kind of come in and defend places that are potentially going to be desecrated or have just been devastated, right? Really, it's a key question for us to think through in terms of what these actions of protection look like, and then again how they're gendered still, or how they've become gendered.
And I'm also kind of interested in too of just like, we've been throwing away the idea of old, right? And just different scales of time here of like how these factor in, right? Like, so 16 years research that was done 20 years ago means something different now. And then, but also when I think about old too, I'm thinking about, a much grander scale of time here too. And so I don't know, I just been.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why for me, one of the other things that I've been inspired by in terms of indigenous studies, theorizing and research are, on these discussions of resurgence and regeneration, where things that are like old, even because of, or despite the ways in which colonization has tried to erase them, these can kind of reemerge, and we're in these moments of returns, right? And what does a return look like, or in Hawaiian, ho'i, and this is something that has been prominent in terms of our dialogues, in our lahui. My friend and one of the key leaders in the Huli organization, Andre Perez, kind of frequently talks about ho'i as the return, as what it is that our activism and our politics is about. That's also been one of the key calls in terms of Maui and the water struggles there, taking up this line from this old song, a name song that was written in the 1860s that had this line, "E ho'i kanani moku'ula," which is to have the beauty or the glory of moku'ula return. And Moku'ula is this important sacred island surrounded by a 17-acre freshwater pond in the middle of Lahaina that was the seat of political and cultural power for both the Maui Island chiefs as well later as Kamehameha and the Hawaiian Kingdom, which is why Lahaina was the capital of the kingdom before it moved to Oahu. But at that site of Moku'ula, and in the pond in particular, there was a powerful mo'o, a reptilian deity spirit who was originally the daughter of the high chief Pi'ilani from the 16th century, and she became deified as this mo'o kiha wahine, who was a really powerful akua that was known to be able to travel throughout the islands, one of the only mo'o spirits known to have been able to do that. She was one of the deities that Kamehameha took on when he was waging his wars to bring all of Hawaii together under his rule. And so that history of having her return, having those waters return, having those relationships return, have been key in terms of another way of thinking of what returns are in the current moment of trying to restore Lahaina. What kind of Lahaina are we going to try to return to and restore in the wake of its devastation, that devastation that was created by, the dewatering of it because of corporate capitalism. And as my other colleagues have noted, Kapua Sproat, writing also with Naomi Klein, this kind of plantation disaster capitalism that's kind of brought the havoc, and it continues to be this moment of attempted new land grabs and water grabs in Lahaina, all things that really call for us to think of what it means to be in this moment where everyone's seeking to return, rebuild, restore. What do these actually look like for us? Sorry, I took that a few different directions.
A few different directions.
And Ethan, go for it.
Oh, it's. I feel like I'm changing the direction when it comes to a return, because as you're mentioning these returns, it's been really interesting to hear you connect different places, but also different time frames. But I'm actually curious about one of your time frames, which was being born in Germany. Yeah, if you don't mind me saying or asking, how long were you there for?
I was only there 6 months. I don't remember any of it.
Right.
But it's it's part of my story there. I mean, it's a story of U.S. empire and its bases, and the recruitment of our people here, local. My dad's not Hawaiian; he's Okinawan, but local as well as Hawaiian men and women into the military, and where it takes people and why they go into it. For these opportunities to travel, to see the world, to find advancement in kind of service economy dominated by tourism that you don't have a lot of necessarily other good opportunities or choices.
So you bring that up because a lot of that kind of connects with the work that I do, but I've always been curious about how being around those spaces has an impact on the way you see the world. As you're growing up, with your dad in the Army, were there events or what, kind of impact did that have on the way that you were viewing, not just necessarily in the military, but being who you are and, ultimately the direction that you would take?
Yeah, well, the biggest impact it had on, I can't say the biggest, I mean, there's a lot of different ones, but the way that I always feel the biggest impact of having been an Army brat for the first 8 years of my life before my parents separated. The biggest impact was learning how to speak, learning how to talk, literally, learning how to talk in military bases, and which, gave me the kind of standard English that I still have now, which always marked me as really different as soon as I came back home. Most of the local kids growing up here, they speak Pidgin. Once you start speaking the way I do, why are you talking Haole? And, where are you from actually? And, then everything starts being questioned about who you are, which for most of the time, I mean, when people see me, they won't, but when they hear me, then they say, oh, something's different about you when I'm growing up, especially, which led to some bullying, that led me to feel like an outsider a lot. So I kind of stuck to books a lot. I was, always had a little bit of an outsider perspective because of that. And so, I mean, I guess the book part led me to focus on academics. I wasn't so involved in a lot of other stuff in my early years. And I was just kind of always seeing the world a little bit outside of it, growing up, looking like I'm local and having the genealogies, but then having a lot of different ways of, linguistic and culturally being different because of how I was raised in those kind of really weird spaces of Army bases. Not only, actually I spent more time in Colorado, 3 years there, which again, most of it I don't remember. And then we were in Georgia for a little while, for a few months, and then we came back here to Oahu when I was 4. But even here, when my parents were still together, we lived in Tripler at the Army base there before they separated when I was in 3rd grade, and I had a younger brother. So my younger brother and I went back to Maui with my mom, and then my dad kept on being kind of deployed in different places. So again, especially when I went back to Maui, where my difference as someone who was raised in the military really was most evident and apparent. And things, that I kind of struggled with, I think, through my life, and that I think has really mapped into how I end up in spaces like anthropology, and also taking up questions around masculinity. A lot of that kind of tracks back to some of those very early experiences. And then also, like you said, the topic of the military itself and other sorts of questions that continue to run through my work in different ways.
That's a lot there. That's a lot.
And that's a latte. That's for you, Brahim. That's for you, Brahim.
Shout out.
That's for you, Brahim.
Oh my gosh.
You spoke in the initial parts of looking at the men's group and then thinking how masculinity is relating to service and other kinds of forms. We've spoken to you, I think, in many ways like an anthropologist, but I want to take some time to focus on you as an ethnic studies scholar and the work you do with the North Shore Field School, with Na Ko'oko'o, and I guess how you are developing as how these two programs that you're leading, taking up, contributing to trade off for your year to year.
Okay, thanks. Let me start with Na Ko'oko'o first. So Na Ko'oko'o, Native Hawaiian Leadership Program that I have been a part of. It's a program that is led by different faculty in our College of Social Sciences each time that it's run, part of our Hawaiian initiative in the college called the Hui Aina Pili Pili. Pili Pili being the name of the Aina that we're located in, the Ili Aina. And first developed by Noi Goodyear Kaupua, really with this idea and model of leadership as taking that form of and metaphor of the ko'oko'o, the walking stick, something that is, grounded in the land and a part of movement, supporting communities and places. And so that program is one that I had an opportunity to lead. It's with undergraduate students. The primary interest is in supporting Native Hawaiian graduate students, but it's also open to all students. And in fact, we've also, over the years, also been really explicit about really inviting, and especially our Pacifica or Pacific Islander students to also participate, but really any students who are, dedicated to this place and this Aina and support of sovereignty, of life and communities. So that really has been, I think, a core thing. I've been able to bring in ethnic studies students into communities through. When I've had the chance to do the program, I've done it twice, 2017 and 2019. We do a lot of Aina-based work, going to different sites in the community where they're doing kind of land restoration work. I'm also involving an off-island trip. 1 year I took students to Kaho'olawe, the other year to Mokuokeawe, Big Island. I'm planning to do the Na Ko'oko'o again this spring, and summer is when we're planning to take students to Maui. to be involved in a lot of the efforts there. So really at the core of what we do in ethnic studies, to support communities, to have students from those communities working with leaders from there as well, trying to highlight again our history our way in terms of what we're reading, focusing on literature that's coming from these places that we want to be working in, and also having community members come into our class to be sharing and to help guide them, and teaching students how to be ready to show up, to be in support, to do the work that needs to be done. And there's just been some really awesome students that have come through there, and not only ethnic studies, although I'm teaching the course through ethnic studies, so by virtue of that, they all become ethnic studies students, and try to recruit a few of them to major also. So yeah, that's been really transformational program, not only for the students but for myself and even my whole family, when I try to involve all of them in our trips when we go on them and such.
I think maybe give us a little bit about the field school, since that's something you're also consistently working with.
Yeah, so the field school actually has more of an anthro origin, although it's become more ethnic studies in the more recent years. But it started off as an archaeology field school that I was participating in more as a kind of community engagement sort of faculty and director of, back in 2013 is when it was started as an archaeology field school in partnership with Kamehameha Schools. And then over the years, we had 5 years of it as archaeology, and then we shifted to it being ethnographic, which was at that point that I became the primary director of it, and then I made it both anthro and ethnic studies, to focus really on doing oral histories in the community. And we had 4 years in Waialua on the North Shore, ended essentially by COVID, and then had a little bit of a break, and more recently I took the field school to Waiale'e, which is another community on the North Shore but more on the Kahuku side, that we just did in fall 23, and it's been really an important opportunity to bring students to communities, to record the stories of those communities, to give them some training in oral history. And this is very much in alignment with our Center for Oral History in our Ethnic Studies department, which I've also been very involved with. Again, in supporting the aspirations of organizations and families that are trying to do really important work. Initially it was with Kamehameha Schools, and they have an Aina Ulu program that is really meant to support community-based projects, Aina-based learning. And then more the last one with Waiale'e with the North Shore Community Land Trust, which has recently taken over a lease of about 30 acres of UH land out there that used to be an experimental agricultural station, and now the organization North Shore Community Land Trust is trying to restore it to be a cultural, agricultural, and educational space for the community. So it was nice to be a part of that, and I'm still involved in some of the activities, even though our field school is done there.
I guess, yeah, that is a kind of actually a good prompt here of, I'm imagining as a scholar and as a, you're always looking far ahead in terms of research. What are some of the kinds of research that you're hoping to engage in maybe 5-10 years when you finish this next book project, when you feel you have a good handle on whatever you're working on right now?
Yeah, well, I've started to do more with Maui and with the water struggles there in the wake of the fires. With the Center for Oral History, again, that's a nice segue, I guess, from our last discussion, and the current director, Mary, and our grad student, Alana. We've applied for a grant to do oral histories on Maui, around Vai, around water, and the struggles around them. So if that comes through, then we'll be doing that, and that'll be the next big project. And even if it doesn't, I feel like that's still a project I'm going to take up on my own anyway. I'm working with two of the leaders in the community who I've known for some years through, again, the Hale Mua. They were actually a part of a different group called Nakoa. Nakoa Kauika Meheo Nakupuna with Ke'o Moku Kapu, and also another, his son-in-law, Kaipo Kekona. Two of the really prominent leaders who emerged in the wake of the fires, but had already been leaders in the community in Lahaina. So currently working with them on an article about the hubs that they set up in the wake of the fire, to support community, these resource distribution hubs that were part of the massive mutual aid efforts that took place in Lahaina. Over the last year, really the one that Kaipo and others in his community helped to set up, Napili Noho, only just closed this month, only a couple weeks ago, I think. They're the last one. They were the last kind of hub, I believe, that was still open. All the rest had shut down. But yeah, recovery efforts there, all of which kind of tracks back to water and the control and fair use and distribution of water for futures that are not just reproducing the ones that led to these catastrophes. I have a small little article I just published in American Quarterly that starts to touch on those themes. But that's really, I think, regardless of whether we get the funding for the oral histories or not, and that's likely where my next return is. That ho'i is to back to Maui, where, it all started for me.
So I want to, since we've been talking about time and the scale of time and returns and other forms of knowing that have been there, I wanted to ask about how you're able to kind of represent that in your work, and maybe the tensions that you feel in terms of to be, writing allochronically, right? Positioning Hawaiians in a one particular time and space. At the same time that you're wanting to move beyond that, at the same time you're also wanting to anchor deeper Hawaiian knowledge.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm glad you asked that, because there's a whole other thing I've been involved with that I didn't even mention. But in collaboration with colleagues at the Auckland University of Technology, AUT, Albert Rifiti in particular, as the head of a project called Va Moana, I've been able to start exploring different Hawaiian thinking around this concept of wa, which is both time, in a period of time, or a season, or an epoch, or an era. Wa is also a space between 2 points, so it's both temporal but also spatial. And then there's another meaning of wa, which is also in terms of a sound, like a resounding, like an echo or a roar. And so as part of his project, which is looking at va across the Moana, across Oceania, which in Samoa and Tonga is more spatial than temporal, but in Hawaii and Aotearoa is more temporal than spatial. But there's both in all concepts in Oceania. It's helped me think about these questions in new ways of, what does it mean to kind of go back to old ways and make them new again? Or in part, it's rethinking what we're talking about with time and the relationship between 2 points in time and space, and how wa, as this broad oceanic concept, helps to go past some of these dichotomies that have kind of been set up between traditional and modern, in the sense that Hawaiian concepts of time, like elsewhere in the Pacific, places the past in front of us. And this is a quote that has been made famous by Lili Kala Kame'elehiva, Kawa Mamua, Kawa Mahope, which is the time in front is time in back. But it hinges on this concept of wa, as a kind of relational time space that has always been a part of indigenous oceanic thinking and being. So the kinds of linear progressions of time that has been much critiqued, that come from Western forms of thinking, are not only kind of wrong here, but really just misses an entire other way in which that past is always before us, in which we're always engaging it in new ways, but it's not necessarily in the fashion that we sometimes kind of deride as kind of reinventing the past or such. And so thinking through Wa, thinking through our own concepts, thinking in relation to other Pacific thinkers has been really productive for engaging in those discussions in new ways, things that have been kind of discussed and kind of poorly in some versions of the academy, including some of the anthropological debates around the invention of tradition. But in a different way, it's not only talking about Wa as these kind of relational time spaces, but recreating them in these networks that we're a part of as we're engaging in that work. And that's a different kind of project, right, than just kind of the writing and theorizing of time and space. And that's our Oceanic Ethnic Studies plug.
There it is.
As you keep thinking about these returns, what is the hope that you have for the work that you do?
My hope is that it will enable other returns. I mean, I feel real fortunate that I've been able through my work to be able to reconnect with my history, my culture, my past, and I'm just going to avoid the scare quotes at this moment. I mean that's my experience of it is reconnecting with those old ways, my kupuna, my ancestors, through learning traditions that my ancestors, my mother, them were forced to forget or not ever taught, and we're able to relearn them, to have our children go deeper into them. Our youngest daughter was in immersion for all this time. She just started in 7th grade at Kamehameha, but she went through immersion through 6th grade, and she's fluent in Hawaiian, which is just a huge thing, to have that return of the language come back to our family. And I'm really fortunate. We're fortunate. We're privileged to have the resources in education to make that happen. Not every Hawaiian family is, right? And so, the more that we can do in all of our little ways, and it doesn't need to be the language per se, but whatever it is that we can help families return to or help return to the families, whether it's land, whether it's practice, knowledge, that's a hope for whatever research I do. And in the case of the Maui research, it very literally is the water, the return of the waters, which have been returning on their own anyway. This is kind of what the fires revealed. They revealed a lot of pain and harm, but it also revealed that once you take away these wells that were set up to divert the waters and these infrastructures of capitalism and settler society that have led to all these diversions, once that's gone, the waters remember where to go. They go the path that they're supposed to. And that's what happened immediately in the aftermath, and it's making sure that those waters can continue to ho'i, right? And that's not only the waters literally, but all that the vai represents, which is throughout our society, communities, and again, not only for Hawaiians too. I mean, everyone that drinks our water is somehow connected to and fed by our vai, and so this is for all of the people of Hawaii to understand, what's the importance of these kinds of returns for everyone.
Dr. Tangon, thank you so much. Ty, thank you so much for being with us today. That feels like a wonderful place to end our talk with you today. You've been such a inspiration and powerful force in my life for the past 15 years, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for that. And it's wonderful to have an opportunity to just cruise in a car with you. So that'll do it for Island Connections. We will see you next time.